Now, we have a great in-studio guest for you guys, a guy we've been meaning to talk to for a while. Matt Ho, he is a former Marine Corps captain, served in Iraq a couple of times, and then he was a Foreign Service official in Afghanistan until he resigned over our policy in Afghanistan. Matt, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We really appreciate you coming on. So, Matt, first, tell us what you were doing in Afghanistan.
Sure. I was with the State Department. I was a Foreign Service officer. I was assigned there as a political officer, and in that role I served in two separate parts of the country, one in the east along the Pakistan border, and then one in the south, again along the Pakistan border. My job was to be a political advisor, and in that I worked closely with the Afghan government officials in terms of fighting the Taliban insurgency.
That's interesting. And when you went to Afghanistan, did you believe that we could turn it around and that we could win this war and that we can leave, I suppose, Afghanistan relatively stable, et cetera?
Yeah, I think I did. I was confused about it. I had a lot of concerns about it. I had several friends and many colleagues who had served there before. I had done a lot of studying of it, read the history, and so my views weren't clear on how I felt about Afghanistan. However, this is what I did. This was my career, and I want to continue to contribute and continue to serve my country, so went to Afghanistan.
And what did you learn there that made you change your mind about our policy there?
What became very clear to me very quickly was that the people who are fighting us, the guys who are killing our troops, are fighting us for the most part because we're occupying them. What also became very clear to me is that there's an ongoing civil war. The civil war that was going on in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, that didn't end in 2001 when America and NATO invaded Afghanistan. It's still going on. And all we're doing is supporting one side in that civil war.
So I think a lot of people are unsure what that civil war is.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit more about that. What do you mean when you say civil war?
It's complex. I think most of us think of civil war, we think of North versus South. This is much more complex, much more convoluted. But really what it comes down to is you have, within the Pashtun society, you have an urban, educated, secular class. And then you also have a very rural, very poor, very traditional religious class. And that's where you have this split. And on top of that, you then have ethnic divides between the Pashtuns and the Tajiks and Uzbeks. So those are the sides we're talking about.
So that's where it gets really complicated, because when you say civil war, you're mainly referring to the locals that are poorer versus the educated, more urban guys, right? But then when you add in the element of the different ethnicities, then I begin to lose track of who's on what side. So do we know? I mean, are we fighting Tajiks somewhere and Uzbeks somewhere else, or are they on our side? Are the urban guys on our side, and we're not entirely sure?
For the most part, the urban guys are on our side. The Tajiks and Uzbeks form the bulk of the security forces. What you had in 2000.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Yes. What we had in 2001, or what you had in 2001 Afghanistan, you had the Taliban government, and then you had the Northern Alliance, which was composed mainly of Tajiks and Uzbeks. We overthrew the Taliban government and basically put the Tajik and Uzbek government in power. Karzai flits in between those two different camps.
But Karzai is Pashtun,
Yes.
and the Taliban is mainly Pashtun. Is that correct?
Yes, the Taliban is all Pashtun.
All Pashtun.
But what you have, again, is you got that split within Pashtun society between the urban an urban sect and in a rural sect. And what you had happen in the 70s and 80s, you had this urban, progressive, secular class try and modernize Afghanistan. And that's where the roots of the rebellion, that's where the revolt came from, because they were trying to change a way of life. They did things like education reform. Well, education threatens the mullahs and the religious establishment's power base. So they did not want to see that at all. So they rallied the rural people to be against the government. And you had just other issues like that, too.
So it's fascinating, though, because Karzai, in the voting, as fraudulent as it was supported by the Pashtuns. So, and then the northern ethnicities mainly went to his opponent, Abdullah, because he's, if I've got this right, he's from that area. So it's a weird situation where the Pashtun leader is getting Pashtun votes, but his army is actually Uzbek and Tajik.
And, you know, to make this even more complicated, Abdullah is actually half Pashtun.
Right.
I mean, it's very complex. Nothing's clear. The deal, though, is that Karzai did get a significant support from the Pashtuns. He got some support from the Tajiks and Uzbeks as well. He did a very good job coalition building. He brought in General Dostum, who's an Uzbek, who's also a war criminal.
Well,
so that's
in
another
Afghanistan, who is it?
But that's another aspect of this. Do we want our young men and women fighting and dying over there to prop up a corrupt and illegitimate regime? You see the people that Karzai's brought into his government, like Marshal Fahim, who's that guy. These are not guys who are just selling a couple bags of pot. These guys are trafficking tons of heroin. These are serious drug lords, and Karzai and most of that government is complicit in it.
So Matt, we're talking to Matt Ho. He was serving as a diplomat for the State Department in Afghanistan when he resigned and said we're not going in the right direction here. Let me challenge you a little bit more on this because, my proclivity, I'm very secular, okay?
Yep.
And I am very, very concerned about extremist Islam. Now, I was born Muslim, so I don't have a thing against Muslims, obviously, right? But extremist Islam is a real concern throughout the world, and especially in Afghanistan. So I want the urban guys in Afghanistan to win, right? So I think, is there any chance that if we supported them, and we did it right, not just through the military, but we built schools, we built hospital, we built literally bridges, right, et cetera, that we could help them to win that conflict and then make Afghanistan so much better for the whole population, especially the ones that are being suffocated by the mullahs in the south?
Sure. We're doing that right now. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on roads, on bridges, and schools. I think it's been underreported. Where we couldn't build enough things. I mean, we had just so much money stacked up, and we had run out of things to build. This is a civil war. The causes of the civil war go back generations. Building somebody a bridge or a school or a clinic is not going to have them change sides in a civil war that comes down to...
You don't think so?
No.
I mean, because doesn't that help? Doesn't they think, well, you know what?
It's
I'm not sure I trust Karzai, but on the other hand, or the Americans, that's for sure. But they did build a nice hospital here.
It's nice, but it's not going to change people's views and their ties to their
Why?
families.
Why doesn't it change their views?
Because it's something deeper than that. And if it had, one of the things people forget or don't realize, the Soviets tried the same thing. The Soviets were brutal and they were horrible in the way they conducted their war. But the Soviets also had upwards of 20,000 civilian advisors in Afghanistan. And they tried the same thing too. They tried to build schools, they built roads, they built cultural centers, and it didn't work for them. This is a generational conflict. This is an assault on people's way of life as they see it. This is the government coming, as one Afghan general said to me, the reason we started the revolution in '78 was because the government came to our villages and asked us what our wives' names were. This is an assault on the most intimate part of their lives as they see it. It's an assault from the outside.
It's a little much, but as you describe it to me, it seems like it's the Republicans in the rural areas and the Democrats in the cities.
There is I've used that red state, blue state comparison before to try and get that across. Of that, this is a thing that comes down to beliefs. It'd be like saying you have a Democratic governor who builds a school in a district hoping to get the people to change their mind on abortion. It's not going to happen.
That's an interesting analogy. That's a good analogy.
We have to think of it in those sense in terms of what would it be, Cenk, if you and I were there, what would we do? If this was our valley, and there's a concept that we call valleyism, and it's nationalism scaled down to a local community level. If you and I were in our valley and foreign troops came into it, what would you and I do? And if I was working with those foreign troops, what would you think of me? And for a lot of us, I'm 36, and I grew up watching Red Dawn. I mean, and you got to think of it, flip that around, and put it into perspective.